পুরো সৃষ্টি পানি থেকে। আল্লাহ বৃষ্টি সৃষ্টি করেছে, জীবজন্তু সৃষ্টি করেছে, ফলমূল মানব জাতির জন্য। আমরা যে সমস্ত ফলমূল পশু পাখি যাই আহরণ করি, সব কিছুর পিছনে পানির একটি বিশেষ ভূমিকা আছে। পানি জীবন দেয়, কিন্তু পানি আবার জীবন ধ্বংস করে দেয়।
Given that sea level is very likely to rise in large areas of Bangladesh, and these areas are inhabited by millions of people, where will these people go?
I don't know.
The People's Republic of Bangladesh is a bustling nation with a population of 160 million.
The main industries in Bangladesh are agriculture, textiles, these include the garment factories as well as other textiles, and shipbuilding and shipwrecking. When ships are decommissioned, there's a huge industry in Chittagong. Its annual GDP is about 150 billion US dollars, and per capita the average Bangladeshi earns about 1,000 US dollars.
This small nation sits to the north of the Indian Ocean, bordered almost entirely by India. The water towers of Asia, the Himalayas, drive the river systems that enter from the north, while to the south, the Bay of Bengal fringes the coast.
Bangladesh is a land of water. It has thousands of rivers and hundreds of thousands of creeks and canals. The life and livelihood of people are intricately entangled with water. Water is probably the most vulnerable sector of Bangladesh in terms of climate change.
Since the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, the climate has consistently changed. These changes caused a complete transformation of the Earth's surface. From near-global rainforests to vast ice sheets, the Earth's surface has changed time and time again. Temperatures have been high and low, the seas have risen and fallen. But now it's different. Since the Industrial Revolution, which began 200 years ago, the human species has completely transformed the planet at breakneck speed. Rapid industrial development has come at a cost. For 200 years, an invisible threat has been growing in the atmosphere. Each year, we release 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which traps additional heat. We are to blame for a warming world. It is changing the planet as we know it. Combined with mass deforestation and animal agriculture, the addition of greenhouse gases is changing the natural balance that existed before. These gases are accumulating in the atmosphere, and if left unchecked, the climate change they cause will completely alter the face of the planet.
OTC.
OTC is go.
TBC. Tank and booster go. PTC. PTC is go. Safety console. Safety console is go. SRO. SRO is go. You have a range clear to launch.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 2, 1, 0.
With the pursuit of manned spaceflight over the last 60 years, we have realized how fragile our home is. When viewed from up here, we see it differently. With the advancement of spaceflight, we have also developed an incredible ability to monitor the Earth. Space agencies around the world have launched dozens of satellites which have provided a unique perspective. Were it not for these technological advances, many of us wouldn't have even noticed the gradual changes which are occurring. On average, the atmosphere has warmed by 1 degree Celsius since the end of the 19th century. The increasing average temperature of the planet is having visible impacts, but there is a subtle change that we need to keep a particularly close eye on.
We are expecting sea level rise in the future because the Earth is warming, is heating up, and it's not as clear as we or many people might think that it is from where sea level rise is actually originating or where it is coming from. Most of global warming, 90% of this increased energy in the atmospheric ocean system is actually taken up by the oceans.
When water is warmed, it literally expands. As more heat is added, water physically takes up more space. This is happening to the oceans. As they absorb the majority of the extra heat being trapped in the atmosphere by greenhouse gases, our oceans are taking up more space, causing sea levels to rise.
Then, of course, we have got other contributors to sea level rise, and that is at the moment mainly glaciers. So mid-latitude glaciers, like glaciers in the New Zealand Alps or in the European Alps, which are rapidly shrinking, and they also contribute to sea level rise. And then we have got ice sheets.
In each polar region, vast quantities of water exist, locked up on the land as ice. In the south, the Antarctic continent, and in the north, Greenland. Combined, these regions hold enough ice to raise global sea level by 70 meters. As more heat is added to the Earth's system, trapped by accumulating greenhouse gases, the polar regions will warm.
The assumption is that if there is an increase of temperature, obviously the existing ice system will melt. It means the addition of extra water to the ocean system. And if the extra water is added to the ocean system, that is, the ocean water volume will increase. As a consequence of that, the low-lying country will be inundated.
So there is no doubt about that the sea level will rise, but the question what we have to ask today is how fast is that going to happen?
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, is the United Nations body responsible for compiling and evaluating all the evidence of a changing climate. They have concluded most recently that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Since 1950, the human influence on the climate has dominated the observed warming. Both Greenland and the West Antarctic are losing ice at an accelerating rate. In essence, how fast and by how much sea level rises is entirely up to us.
The best estimate is that sea levels will be by about 1 meter higher by the end of that century.
By how many degrees the planet warms is directly linked to the amount of greenhouse gases we decide to release from this point onwards. How much more the planet warms will determine how much the oceans expand and how much ice melts in the polar regions. Hidden in all the scientific complexity, a simple fact lies. We choose how much and how fast sea levels will rise. Bangladesh is a delta. The majority of the land is formed from the sediments carried by the mighty rivers that run through the country. This landscape is naturally evolving, constantly changing with the ebb and flow of the rivers. In some regions, new land is forming, while in others, it is disappearing. With the rise of the global oceans, a new dimension is being introduced, a new stress on the coastal zone, the beginning of a new phase of evolution of the landscape.
Water has implications. Too much water is flood, too little water is drought, wrong type of water, salt water, is disastrous, wrong timing of water. Water when you don't need it, i.e. in the flood time or in the agricultural growth period, could be disastrous. So too much, too little, wrong timing and wrong type all has implications on the very fragile and balanced structure of the ecosystem and hydrosphere of Bangladesh.
It's not only the intensely destructive one-off weather events which will increase in frequency and force with climate change. There's a more gradual impact with just as severe consequences. The silent creep of the sea making its way inland has profound impacts on the country of Bangladesh.
Drinking water, number one. In the south, with the rise of the sea level, the drinking water situation is really, really bad. So you have saline water which you just can't drink. It's like not having, you need air to breathe. The next day you need water to drink, and you don't have it.
And for a country like Bangladesh, it's an irony that we have so much water, but in one part of the country we can't really provide enough fresh water for all. Salinity intrusion has become so major issue. 2 million people right now is suffering from, access to safe drinking water.
The other aspect which we haven't touched upon, we have talked about rising sea levels. The other is the glacial melt in the Himalayas. The Himalayas are really essentially the water towers for South Asia, and 800 to 900 million people depend on the water from the Himalayas. The freshwater requirements are met from there. And so if you continue to have glacial melt, so in the short term you're going to have flooding, but in the long term, medium to long term, there'll be scarcity of water. Sharing of resources amongst countries is going to become an even greater challenge. We are talking about a situation or a potential scenario when the water sources are going to dry up completely.
We have a population of over 150 million people who are mostly dependent on agriculture. So water is something that's needed for planting rice, for our food. But then when there's too much water, it kills, it destroys the crops. And when the water from the sea comes in to the rivers and to the land, it salinates the rivers and the soil. And then in the last few years, there's also been a challenge to develop rice that can grow in increasingly salty soil.
Rice is the core part of the Bangladeshi diet, and the production of it is crucial to the country's economy. But it's been threatened by salt from rising seas, so scientists are developing modified varieties that are saline resistant.
Ultimately, the farmers and the poor fishermen who are basically living a subsistence life, for them it will be very, very difficult to cope with all these changes. They are doing it right now, but how long they will be able to do? As you say, we are adapting, but adaptation has a limit.
The coastal region, which can seem so tranquil, is on the front line of rising sea levels and at the most risk from storms tracking inland from the Bay of Bengal.
If you're sitting in Europe, you're not living on the fringe because 2 degrees, 1 degree, 5 degrees doesn't really make so much of a difference. But here, it's 1 degree, 2 degree, 2 extra cyclones a year, 2 extra tidal waves a year is life and death. It's not a question of just being comfortable and not comfortable, it's a question of life and death. I've seen once one man, he was like totally out of his head. Because for him, reality was where his home was yesterday. You know, he would say, my home is, go to my home, come home. But his home is no longer there. Can you imagine the pathos of that? So you see in front of your eyes a farmer who was sitting there happy, going to a little shop, having a little smoke, having a cup of tea. The next day, within 1 week, he cannot send his children out to school anymore. He cannot even access any help. He's totally gone. You see how easy it is to start a project. It's very easy. It's to restart something, and people sometimes have to restart 20 times, 30 times, 40 times in their lifetimes. What amount of strength do you want from these people?
If the sea level is risen by 1 meter, the map of Bangladesh will be changed.
You're looking at mass displacement. Based on the population dynamics now, that's 30 million people.
Bangladesh is projected to lose 17% of its land with 1 meter sea level rise, displacing up to 30 million people.
That will have devastating impact on Bangladesh. That will threaten the existence of the people in Bangladesh.
That's the first thing people do. They die. You know, they die. They don't drop dead like that. I mean, that they do when there's a calamity, but they die. They die because they don't have enough food. They die because there's a health issue. They die because when they have to move, they don't know how to rebuild their lives again.
What typically happens is that people first move to the city. They move to wherever they can. They don't have the money to move far, usually. A lot of people have moved to Dhaka, the capital, and Dhaka does not have the infrastructure to deal with large numbers of people, but that's where they're going. And so Dhaka already has huge problems because of climate change. Dhaka does not have the water, energy, sanitation, any kind of capability to deal with huge numbers of migrants. And so the reality is a lot of these people are going to try to go elsewhere.
When you're not given any space for breathing, reactions set in. One bad element sparks. You know, it's like a little spark. It's a match, one match responsible for fire.
গলি সহ নানা প্রতিবন্ধকতায় দমকল বাহিনী।
কিছু নাই, ঢাকাতে আসিয়ে তো ওই বাড়ি ভাড়া নিয়ে এখানে আসি। 15 বছর থেকে আমি আসছি। এই 15 বছর যা কামাই করছি, রোজগার করছি, যা কষ্ট করছি, দুঃখ করছি, আইতে একটা বন্ধু আমি ওই ম্যাচে খাচ্ছি। এই যে আসছি দেখি কিছু কিছু জিনিস বাইরে নাই, কিছু নাই, সব শেষ হয়ে গেছে আমার। একটা পানি খামো গ্লাস থাকি নাই। আমি এটি আছি, কই যামু বাবা, আমার যাবার টাকাটা নাই, আজকা নাই, কই যামু আমি এখানে।
It is not possible to find room for the people moving into Bangladesh's cities, so slums are born. With inadequate infrastructure and planning, people are at risk. It is difficult to see how communities will cope with continued movement of people to urban areas.
এখানে কি পরিবর্তন হচ্ছে, এখানে প্রতিটা বিষয়ে পরিবর্তন হচ্ছে। আর আমরা ক্লাইমেট চেঞ্জের জন্য আমরা অনেক ধরনের সমস্যার সম্মুখীন হচ্ছি।
UNDP Bangladesh has a very comprehensive way of working with the communities to better help them to prepare to these disasters, to better help them to ensure their livelihoods are secured.
আমার নদী দেখলে ভয় লাগে, আমার সাগর বাইগর সাগর লইয়া গেছে, এই দেখে ভয় লাগে। শুনতেছি সাগরের পানি মাইতেছে, আমি ছেলে মেয়ে দুইজন দি আনিতে করি।
People must firstly have somewhere to live and land to work. The United Nations Development Programme, or UNDP, is working with government and local agencies in Bangladesh to protect both the land and its people from the effects of climate change. Mangrove forests are being planted along coastal regions to resist the incessant threat of the rising seas, and the coast's inhabitants are being trained to feed themselves in more climate-resilient ways.
The ultimate objective of the project is to reduce the vulnerability of the coastal people. As of today, the project involved more than 30,000 vulnerable coastal communities as beneficiaries of the project in different types of adaptation and training measures.
So the first thing that we have done through this project is basically helping the people to get access to lands. So what we call the FFF, forest, fish and fruit. So with an innovative model, we have helped them to grow, fish in the dip, and then we have used the embankment or the dike portion for agriculture and forestry kind of activities.
As you see, here is the Bay of Bengal, and 30 meters apart, 80,000 people are residing. If the sea level rises, these activities, what we are doing, it is valueless. It will not work after devastating inundation throughout coastal areas of Bangladesh due to sea level rise.
These islands are like, a world of their own. Each island has its own distinctive sort of way of speaking, types of food, and traditions. It's going to be a loss of heritage, a loss of community for millions of people.
With continued sea level rise, many coastal areas of Bangladesh are becoming uninhabitable. People are being forced to move out of their homes and into the cities. But the cities are already at maximum capacity. So the question remains, where will these people go if they can no longer fit in cities like Dhaka?
This is a city which has got 18 million people. You can hardly move out in the streets. Everything is getting clogged, jammed. It's not going to end here. Because this same movement from village to village to town, town to cities is going to be cross-border soon.
There is a huge gap in the current law in terms of recognizing climate as a reason. Climate and economics is mixed. It's very difficult sometimes to separate, but climate is a big factor in the economic displacement that's happening in Bangladesh. When we say climate refugee, that is actually a misnomer. The word refugee does not encompass climate change. And we're seeing this whole flux of refugees now across Europe. The reality is people are going to move, as I said, first to cities and then overseas. Will Bangladeshis cross borders? Of course they will.
If I very simply put it that way, it's basically affecting humans' basic human right. Food, shelter, water.
I see this as a very unequal situation, that people, just because of them being coastal people, are being forced to move because of actions of others. I mean, they're not being jailed, but they are not secure in their own communities. To people in coastal Bangladesh, Dhaka is very far away. It's 30 hours by boat from a lot of these places, and it's not at all the kind of world they're used to. It's not where they want to be. It's actually an amazing, pristine, ecological community that they have there. They have no trash, they have no waste. They live very clean, sustainable lives. And those of us that are not living that way are implicating their lives and forcing them to change.
I'm not talking about, overall national economic growth and those bigger dreams. Smaller dreams an individual have. all of us individually have very small dreams. You know, it's not like they're thinking of becoming a millionaire or something. The dream to live, the dream to, you know, put enough food for your kids and for your family on a daily basis, those rights are being impacted by this climate change issue. So that is something we really need to work on, and that is what UN believes in working on, and transforming those issues is absolutely critical for us to have.
What is the sole purpose of United Nations? What is the core objective of UN? Its job is to protect the sovereignty of member states. Now, for 1 meter sea level rise, Maldives will go underwater, so will be 20, 30 other nation states. Well, their sovereignty gone? Who has protected their sovereignty? So it defeats the whole purpose, the single purpose for why United Nations exists.
You know, beggars has no choice. If the international communities does not act properly, the whole problem is thrown to the local people and local level.
We don't see ourselves as victims. We hate to see ourselves as victims. Bangladeshis are fighters. Bangladeshis are fighters and poets and singers. They don't want to give up their land. They want to fight. They want to stay with their communities.
Il y a une tradition de dignité ici, mais c'est un pays à très longue histoire et où le concept de dignité d'un peuple du Bengale a beaucoup joué. Donc mon jugement fait que je pense qu'il faut vraiment que tout le monde soit très attentif à ce qui se passe ici, parce qu'il y a une grande lucidité sur le fait que pour agir de manière positive et active, il faut de l'aide internationale. Le Bangladesh ne peut pas faire tout par lui-même.
So just because of 0.8 degrees centigrade increase of the global temperature, we are facing all these challenges. So what would be the scenario if the 4 degrees centigrade temperature is rising in this planet? That would be definitely devastating. We human in this planet, slowly we are making ourselves endangered. If we understand this, I think we can avert the scenario.
But the thing is, the people throw up their hands and they say, oh, well, it's too late. We can't do anything about it now. Climate change is there, and it's only going to get worse. If we don't address it now, 40 years from now, it's only going to be worse. It's not as if it's just going to stop. We're talking about 1 meter sea level rise. Well, then there's the next meter.
Practical help is needed because no least developed country like Bangladesh should be facing these problems on its own. It's not fair because they did so little, if anything, to contribute to the stock of carbon that has accumulated in the atmosphere. We still don't see enough ambition from countries collectively, and critically, we need to see a path to global emissions peaking with temperature rises no greater than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. If we can't achieve that, we get to what the scientists have conventionally described as catastrophic and irreversible impacts of climate change.
Celui-ci est doublé d'une urgence d'action qui ne tolère plus d'attendre bien longtemps. Le changement climatique, c'est pas simplement une question de risque d'événements exceptionnels, du point de vue climat, c'est pas simplement une question d'adaptation économique, c'est aussi une question de sécurité internationale.
We know that going above 2 degrees spells very, very difficult times. So this propels, I hope, the world to greater action. And it's not good enough for people to say, well, it's somebody else's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility.
I think the trick in our hand is we have enough knowledge, enough information to act. But it's the collective acting that is what is required now. But if we are not that careful, then we will definitely be suicidal, if not evil. But evil is a word that could definitely be attributed to the people who have the choice and have not acted, who have the power and have not used it for greater good of themselves and the community and the planet as a whole.
We have already committed to climate warming and climate change, and in order to mitigate that risk, we need time. The urgent need is to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. In order to achieve that, there's no other way.
climate change is the biggest moral issue of our time, to love your neighbor and to take care of each other and be responsible for your own actions.
And we don't have an option. We don't have the luxury of choice. We have pushed the planetary boundaries to a point after which we can't push it any further.
The West should care because the West are in a position where they have time to look at the world tomorrow. The people who are in the field level are trying to adapt to today. The West are in a position to look at the world tomorrow. As soon as they're in a position to do something, they have a far greater responsibility than those who are trying to eat every day. And that responsibility is beyond whether you're responsible or not for the emission.
If the boat of Bangladesh sinks, then the boat of the other countries are also going to sink.
We must not lose this opportunity because our leaders have not thought it through, or their personal, narrow, myopic vision blurs their own understanding of the planetary processes. Climate change is a global phenomenon with local impacts. But the action must be taken globally. We are all in it together. Either we all swim or all sink. There is no plan B. There is no planet B. This is all we have.